Welcome to GovCon 2018. I hope everyone's having a good time. I'm Karl Kaufmann. I'm a designer, also do front-end and Drupal work. I help organize the DC Drupal meetup, and I also did the design here for GovCon 2018 for the branding. I'm here today to talk about variable fonts and how you can design for performance now with these. I think kind of Heraclitus kind of sums it up fairly well when it comes down to web design. Of course, for anyone that's been working in the field for a while, know that things are changing continually. This also happens even on basic elements like type. A bit about myself. I started out in visual design, print and branding. Mostly I had majored in fine arts with a concentration in art history. Print was a natural adaptation at the time when I graduated. Of course, with the change of media, I started moving into web design, IA, and content strategy. That's where a lot of my work is today still, and also with community involvement, whether it's Drupal, AIGA, or other types of design and web-related and communication events. As far as what I'm talking about today comes down to variable fonts. Some of you may have heard about this. I'm sure that there's already been some demonstrations you may have seen about this. One of the things that really makes me excited about it all, though, is that actually we can be working on effective communication while having good performance. A lot of this comes down to early history of type I'll go into. As far as the overview and how it comes into the performance we're dealing with variable type. Of course, we started out with movable type for the most part when printing technology became widely used. This was used into the 20th century for a lot of print publications. A lot of the type that we use online still is based off some of this older technology, basically of digital drawings of this. From that, started moving into quickening turnarounds, was into photo typesetting, and this was also translated into the digital formats we use. From the early web, and there's still some sort of ancient technologies and web presences that still use some bitmap fonts. That's kind of shown, of course, some of its obsolescence. PostScript was what Adobe started to work with to come out here and basically merge printing technology and online technology. That was superseded by TrueType, which is a lot of the type that we're using today. Adobe tried to go out here and make things more adaptable when it comes down to fitting for size and space of multiple master, but that also had some technical and performance issues. Part of it was also, and this was only print at the time, not online, it also wanted to deal with different copy fitting situations. And of course, I mean, even with a fixed format such as print, you run into oftentimes the copy fitting issues. The problem was that Adobe couldn't even build enough support and mindshare in-house for them to keep this as a viable format, so that kind of got left by the wayside. There were also format wars when it came down to type. Microsoft had one, Apple had one. They were looking on proprietary formats, as it was with web browser technology. OpenType, though, it came down to a truce and detente. And part of the advantage of OpenType is it offers more functionality and variations. It takes some of the ideas from multiple master and builds that in that we can come out here and actually use for adaptation. I mean, part of the challenge also is coming in here is the number of different pieces that make up good web typography. I was looking out here for different elements of the type, coming out here with all these elements are concerned. There's a lot going on. When it comes down to challenges, though, as far as weights are concerned and what we're using in different situations, this is an example of a well-designed typeface used for multiple different copy-fitting situations. You can see here, you can take advantage of a lot of different headline sizes, basically for body weight and also for ultra-condensed when needed. Of course, there's readability, and depending on the type size, that's why there are a number of different weights. When it comes down to the web, though, part of the challenge is this. I use that, for example, for setting up on this badge, but one thing I don't have to worry about when designing for print is going out here and having the file size. Take for an example, forget anything about licensing costs. We're looking at performance costs when you're designing for something like this. Take for an example, I were to design a web project and use all the weights that came in the Knockout family, it could work pretty well as far as the visual and design aspect would be concerned. But the challenge would be is it would probably make the website unusable even for people on the fastest connections. That's where performance comes in. Part of the challenge we have here is balancing, of course, is the visual needs with the user experience. And as I noted, of course, is coming in here, when you start to include a lot of weights to a typeface, that becomes the challenge. Also is accessibility and readability. a number of typefaces that are used on the web. Take, for an example, even Microsoft's Tahoma. We've all seen it and probably used it. The challenge was that it was actually designed by Matthew Carter, and there was a lot of thought put into this. Part of the problem, though, is how it's applied. One of the challenges is that was designed for basically is for bitmap and low resolution screens used at small sizes. That's why it doesn't work very well at large sizes. Then, of course, there's the issue of screen versus print. A lot of the typefaces that I even still use were designed for print output. The challenges for web are a bit different. The typeface I had shown before as an example for all the elements of type is Rooney. That was designed from the outset for web readability, especially on smaller screens. That's where it comes into the challenges, looking what where our target audience is going to be. And there are other technical challenges to come out, which I will discuss with further, is how is the font going to be rendered. As it comes down with responsive images and other content, one of the things to look at when designing and developing is how these are going to be loaded. And that's where a lot of careful consideration of design versus performance, and especially with working with your developers, is going to be important for project success. Another thing also tying into that is language support. There are a lot of fonts out there. Plenty of people are working on designing and making a lot of new innovations in the field. Language support may be a challenge depending on your user needs. As far as checking performance, Google Fonts is an excellent place to do this. One of the things that you can do actually, and I'm showing one of their workhorse fonts, is Roboto. I'm just going to go ahead and show what will happen here is looking at the font load speeds if you go out here to build up with a number of files. And of course, all of these are open source and free, so there's no sort of monetary cost for most of the time of using them. But as you'll notice up here for the performance, when I start to add more weights to the type for going out here and displaying this, that becomes a challenge. All I've done here is I haven't really even added all that much when I'm coming down. And this is all for basically for most languages that would use the Latin alphabet. If I scroll down, though, and start looking at, for example, adding other languages in, take, for an example, if we had some that happened to be, say, for an Eastern European audience, say using Russian or Serbian, this is where you could run into an issue. Right there, of course, is load time size. And a lot of this can be affected. Even if you're working on a major project and using a CDN, font performance is still something you would need to look at. Even having these served off Google Fonts, I can even see this on the website when going out and testing it. It also comes into some of the design challenges you may run into. It's pretty easy, for example, to go out here and say add faux italic or faux bold. Part of the challenge behind that is how true you want to be to the design that the original type designers had set for. Generally, if you're coming out here and caring about font as far as the visual aesthetics of that, it probably would be good to use a bold weight, but here, as I'm showing, of course, is there can be performance issues and there are trade-offs that need to be considered. One of the challenges also here, and this is an interesting site to be trying out here, is looking at basically FOIT versus FOUT. And this comes into some of the technologies coming out here, and basically what it is FOIT is flash of invisible text versus flash of of unstyled text. And I'll show a quick demo of that here. Basically, for coming out here, for example, like this and showing how this renders, this is a bit of font flash. Sometimes that may be a little bit concerning to people, other times not. It happens even on larger websites. That's part of like basically coming into that, like I had mentioned, is FOIT is kind of the old technology, FOUT is the new technology, and there's another alternate that's coming in here is basically is the flash of faux text. As far as loading on a demo site, I went ahead and I did a test of this the other day just to show from this. It's just going from Drupal.org to NewYorkTimes.com. And this is part of the challenge you can notice out there is a little bit of the flash that's coming in here, especially with the headline text. Here, of course, you have a well-designed site that, of course, is designed for a lot of traffic, has a lot of loading, probably using CDN and a lot of third-party font servers. Still, there's a challenge with that. In addition to that, of course, with a media-rich site, you have images that are being served. Of course, you have advertising that's being served. And right here, as you can see in this demo that I'm setting right here, I went up here and set it up for high DSL, just basically to come out here and show what some of our users may be dealing with. As you can see, some of the high bandwidth items, like say the banner ads, aren't even showing up in the small demo. That's where variable type can come in. One of the advantages that you can have here with this is As far as combative, variable type will come in, and if you're going out here to be doing a very involved type design, you can basically come down to it now, when it's available, is that you can have basically 4 font files that can serve for a number of different ways. You can have one for your sans serif, one for your sans serif italic, one for your serif italic, and one for your serif regular. Compatibility, as you can still see, is growing. It's still a new technology and still needs a little bit of maturation to come in. Part of the advantage is that if most of your target audience is using basically the latest and keeping updated, that shouldn't be a problem for the most part. One thing to look at, though, is even though Mac OS is still a rather small segment of the user base, it still requires a minimum level of Mac OS for users to take advantage of this. As far as the type is concerned, for designers to go out here and make variations, that will be called in the CSS. As per the 1.8 specification, there's 6 axes that normally the type can be styled on. There's the italic, there's optical size, there's slant, width, and weight. In addition to this, there are a lot more which can be built, and I'll show this in a few examples. This is showing some of the vfonts.com. This is showing some of the examples and different variations of coming out here. As I'll show here when I'm going out here to make some of the changes on, let me get back to that other slide, excuse me. Let me just check something quickly. Yeah, I'm just checking something very quickly, sorry. Yeah, I do have a video of that playing right now. That's the main thing, is I want to get it running again. Basically what I'm coming down to, let me see if I can get that up for running, is a showing of the number of different variations you can be running on. I can get back to that in a moment. One of the main things behind it is changing the different axes and width weights. Let me get back to that. One of the things about it here is when I'll show up in the demo here, is coming up here for going out here basically and pulling on axis practices. There's a number of different sliders you can pull to show different weights on this. This is showing, for example, for coming out here and copy fitting. One of the advantages for doing this is, say, for example, moving in responsive web design from to desktop devices, tablet devices, and mobile devices. You can basically go ahead and set a lot of the coding to come out here and show this basically for changing the demonstration and the display of the typeface, depending on the user needs. Take, for example, on smaller screens, it may be lended to, of course, be fluid. It's one thing to go out here and set breakpoint styles. Another thing may be also to be watching on the device size and orientation to say the weight of the type can be changed in according to that. As far as the coding is concerned, most of it is fairly straightforward, including coming out here and setting up for fallbacks. Most of this can be done within CSS. It's coming down here on this last where the variation settings are. That's where you will come out here to be looking at your different type sizes as far as the variations depending on the axes. As far as the conclusion is concerned, it's a rapidly evolving offering. The browser support is growing, looking for increasing language support and flexibility, and I would recommend to at least be giving it a try at this point. I'll get back to the demos now too. Are there any questions at this time?
Quick question.
Yes.
So are you saying that it would improve performance because there's sort of one coded font that's flexible?
Exactly.
Than loading several larger files that have everything you need in them?
Exactly. That's what it comes down to a large degree when it comes down to the font performance. If, take for example, you were going and designing a site only in Helvetica, you would only need to have, say, a variable type style for a font file for Helvetica standard and then for Helvetica oblique. Everything would be contained in those files. It wouldn't be like, take for an example, what I was showing earlier, like say with Knockout. If you wanted to design right now with standard typefaces going out here, say with OpenType, you would need to basically have a weight for every one of those fonts downloading. That's where you take a big part of the hit. Anything else? I'll go ahead and pop up some of those demos then, if I can get internet. Basically, for coming up here, this is one of the examples of real workhorse typeface coming in as far as what's being designed for OpenType. One thing that's a bit challenged to this site, though, is, well, let me put that up there.
These things have built-in like limits. Wait, 5,000, and you just kind of like it could go horribly wrong, you know.
It can go horribly wrong, and if you go onto some of the sites like Access Praxis, it's one of the things I'm trying to pop up right now. You can run into this. I think that there actually have to be probably some hard set limits, and you'll notice that because what will happen is it's almost like going into, say, a type application, like say like going out into InDesign and Illustrator, and basically increasing the width, almost putting a lot of line strokes onto them, and you're just basically taking the leading and tracking and popping it right into one another. You can have the text standing right on top of each other.
Big block.
Yes. Now, all I need to do is move this back over. basically for showing up here, it's coming up, let me get my mouse straight down, kind of hard to see right here, but basically coming out here, and you can basically pull width sliders, and this is the same thing as modifying the CSS code, what I was showing. Now you see, for example, like that, that's what you were mentioning, it gets a little bit thick. And like I said, the only thing the CSS is changing is basically coming into the axes on these. And like a lot of this, like of course, like you had mentioned, I think that people need to use their judgment. It's the same like going out here and using standard type in what are at least are the decades-old design tools. The main thing behind it is, and especially when it comes down to the web and accessibility, you would need to check a lot of this because I mean, even at this, what I'm showing right now, you can definitely see some sort of accessibility issues for people that have sort of limited vision. Going into that even more is another example that I would have for that would be on vfonts.
Does that site tell you what you did as something you can use in your CSS?
Oh, yes.
Done?
I'll go ahead and show because there's another one I'm popping up right here is vfont. I'm just going to go out and show because there's a real workhorse that's coming up here. I had in the video. Because when I had mentioned that there's 6 axes, that's basically only that's recognized by the spec. Like if you go on the Microsoft's developer site to go out and show what are recognized, there are some though. What it comes down to is this is what I'm going to pop up right here. Let me just see because I've got my other page. Let me pull that other window over. Now that, of course, is a little bit of a joke font, but I'm going to get to the real ones, though. This is coming out here as Decovar. Now this is basically set up, and like I was showing here, this is over 10 different axes. This was set up to be more decorative and an experimental playground. What happens though is you can set up here to a number of different weights coming up here. This is, of course, can be used for decorative work. This shows, though, the variations you can have here. Well, a lot of things that you used to have to do, for example, like going out here, doing it, say, in Illustrator or Photoshop, or, say, doing some really cool things with CSS, D3, SVG animations, and things like this. This is just going out here and pulling a lot of these sliders to come in here to go ahead and do this. And like it is with the other variable fonts, this is all done with one font file. Again, like I had shown here, there's some things inside this typeface that actually are very practical, others that are not. But this is just basically a demo to show all that's possible. And you're not really limited. And I mean, type designers are trying to push this forward. The main thing about it is what I look at it, at least with the main takeaway when it comes down to variable fonts are, besides any of this, it's just going out here and showing what is possible to be done in a practical, in a practical web design. Any other questions? Yes.
So if, let's say, you were in a browser that did not, wasn't compatible with this, would it just completely not show? Would it show the baseline settings? What would be the sort of behavior?
Generally, the thing to do is just like take, for an example, if I'm going out here and serving fonts and on my own website, for example, I have licenses to the type I do, but I always have a fallback, for example, like say, for example, where it comes in like Trade Gothic is my sans serif. There's always a fallback for basically coming down here to standard type, and especially when it comes down to Helvetica, Arial, sans serif, so on and so forth. That's generally what you do here, is also have a fallback to make sure for that. And especially for what I was showing earlier about, say, if you're going out here, even though these are small type sizes, when it comes down to performance, and especially if you have a user base that's in the developing world, make sure that it always can default to a system font.
So it falls back then?
Yes.
That's
But
great.
I think what he's asking is if somebody's looking at it in a browser that doesn't recognize the variations, will it just see the font as it was originally drawn?
I don't believe at this point that that's going to be available. If you were saying, for example, if somebody is going to be using an older browser that does not support variable fonts, I would say the main thing also is to look for a fallback, and there are code examples.
Yeah, I mean, always
Yes.
have a fallback, but
Mhm.
I think the question is, what do they see? Even, like, let's say you don't have a fallback, you just have this font. Are they just gonna see the font standard in its standard?
Generally, yes.
Yeah, okay,
Mhm.
okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Anything else? Well, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today.